Welcome to Beyond the Book, celebrating the literary heritage of Oklahoma and those preserving it for future generations. Since 1927, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame has been telling Oklahoma's story through its people, through a wide range of programming for all ages. Headquartered in the Gaylord Pickens Museum in our state's capital, publishing is just one of the many ways we support our mission. We also host free field trips, in person and virtual, for schools across the state and provide scholarships for students in each of Oklahoma's 77 counties. The Oklahoma Hall of Fame is recognized as the leader in publishing Oklahoma's history with 180 titles to our name. We also place books published by the Oklahoma Hall of Fame in public and school libraries statewide at no charge. We encourage you to learn more about the Oklahoma Hall of Fame and Gaylord Pickens Museum by visiting our website, oklahomahof.com. Today's participants are Kari Watkins, Executive Director of the Oklahoma City National Memorial and Museum, and Bob Johnson, the first chairman of the Memorial Task Force. Last year, the collaboration between Watkins and Johnson culminated in the release of the Oklahoma City National Memorial and Museum, Looking Back, Thinking Forward. And we are excited to announce that the book has been named a finalist in the design category for the 2021 Oklahoma Book Awards. Released on the 25th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing, the story within the pages is that of an unexpected journey that began at 9:02 a.m. on April 19, 1995, when a massive bomb ripped apart the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City, taking 168 innocent lives, including 19 children, and changed life as we know it forever. It is a story of a journey of violence turning to hope as the world witnessed a response characterized by an unprecedented melding of courage, compassion, selflessness, and unity. The response became known around the world as the Oklahoma Standard. It is the story of a wounded and shocked community that dared to be different in its approach to memorializing the losses suffered, the lessons learned, and the hope that arose from chaos. Kari Watkins, who recently celebrated 25 years with the memorial, is from Cleveland, Oklahoma, and is a third-generation journalist. During her tenure as executive director, she has orchestrated the design competition for the memorial and the building of the museum, is responsible for the operations of the Oklahoma City National Memorial and Museum, one of Oklahoma's and the nation's most visited sites, and serves as race director for the annual Oklahoma City Memorial Marathon. Under her leadership, the museum has been recognized with the Videographer Award of Excellence, a Gold American Alliance of Museums Muse, the FBI Director's Community Leadership Award, and multiple Addies, PRSA Awards, and Oklahoma Tourism Redbud Awards, among countless others. Personally, Watkins has been named the Journal Record's Woman of the Year and received the Stanley Draper Award for Community Excellence, Women in Communications Byliner Award, University of Oklahoma Gaylord College of Journalism Distinguished Alumni Award, and the John F. Kennedy Community Service Award. From Thomas, Oklahoma, Bob Johnson was appointed by Mayor Ron Norick as chairman of the Memorial Task Force following the bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, and as chairman of the Oklahoma City National Memorial Trust by President Bill Clinton and reappointed by President George W. Bush. Johnson joined the firm of Crowe and Dunlevy in 1967, has served as an adjunct professor of law for the University of Oklahoma's College of Law and was the first managing editor of the Oklahoma Environmental Law Handbook. He is the recipient of the Dean A. McGee Award, the Oklahoma Bar Association's Outstanding Achievement Award, and the Ellen Hardin Walworth National Medal for Patriotism. I would like to welcome both of our distinguished guests and thank you both so much for being here. Welcome. Can you both spend a few minutes discussing your roles with the memorial and the museum prior to our getting into the Q&A?
My role started unknowingly 5 days after the bombing. On that day, I attended an American Red Cross board meeting, and after the meeting, I commented to another board member that I'd heard rumors of various memorials being planned, and I was hopeful that Governor Keating and Mayor Norick would consolidate those efforts. That statement was made without any intent of becoming involved in memorial planning. The next day, Kathy Keating called and said that those comments had been relayed to her, that the governor's office was receiving many suggestions regarding memorials, many items that needed to be archived, and asked if I would take responsibility for planning a memorial. I followed up a few days later with a meeting with Ron Norick to talk about the possibility of creating a memorial task force. After that meeting, I solicited the assistance of Karen Luke and Tom McDaniel, and later 5 other acquaintances, to start talking about an organization and a plan for moving forward to create a memorial. As was stated, Mayor Norick appointed a very diverse 350-member memorial task force in June of 1995. And that task force represented a true cross-section of Oklahoma City. All races, religions, walks of life, geographical locations. It was probably the most diverse organization that had ever been created in Oklahoma City. So with that task force, then we started moving forward, and I agreed to chair it. I think I agreed to chair the effort for 2 primary reasons. Number one, I thought we could create a memorial that would forever preserve the inspiring contrast between the brutality of the bombing and the tenderness and selflessness of the public response. But more importantly, I thought we could conduct the memorial planning process in a manner that would be cathartic for a wounded and shocked community, and perhaps would be just as important as, or maybe even more important than, the resulting physical memorial. So for the next 6 years, I followed that course.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kari.
Well, I was just lucky enough to get to learn from Bob, and I was doing a business transaction with one of Bob's counterparts, and he was trying to ask what I was going to do for the next few months, years, whatever, and I was trying to finish my MBA, and I'm not sure exactly. He asked for my resume or something, and something Bob, and I got it. I went to meet with Karen Luke and Roland, and met with Bob the next day, and I think March 1st of 1996, I came on board, and we haven't really looked back. I mean, it's just been a process a community process that really hasn't had, success is never one person. It's always usually a team. And it really has been a team effort by a lot of different people who have contributed to this process of, in the early days, the effort and the work that Bob and Karen and Roland did, and some of those guys put in on the earliest moments. I mean, they all had full-time lives, and this was just something they took on extra. And so to watch that from afar as a young person who was very molded by these really the kind of the stellar people of the community who were strong and could bring community together. That when I go into communities now and see dealing with crisis, I mean, you never underestimate the power of the people in that state and how they can come together. And Bob and the team he put together was remarkable. And when he talks about diverse, it was people from all all over the city, rescue workers from all over the country. And today, many of those people are still involved, and some who couldn't be involved then have stepped up to be involved now. It's remarkable to look back on.
I should interject that Kari started as a part-time employee because that's all we could afford. And our new part-time employee immediately started working 12, 16-hour days, 7 days a week. Must be a record for a part-time employee.
We shouldn't talk about that.
Well,
We probably violated some law.
well,
It really was
a statute of limitations.
It really was a remarkable journey, and Bob would agree with me on this. I mean, just to work that close with family members who were going through such grief, and they figured out how to go beyond themselves to give back and to help contribute to what would be a lasting memory. And the survivors who were trying to put their own lives back together and their families back together, and then the first responders who were trying to. I mean, they'd never been involved in something like this. They felt like they were just doing their job. So to ask them to be vulnerable and be out there, I mean, that was a tough position to put. That we asked them to put in. I don't think we realized it at the time, but really to be able to work with those folks and to learn from them and to walk beside them as they went through that journey was something that will never be matched in our lives.
Right.
Wonderful. Ken, before we get involved with some of our Q&A, we've had a lot of questions submitted in advance. I was wondering if you could share your thoughts about the importance of the book coming out now and its relevance today.
As we were working on this book, and I was reflecting back on the 25 years after the bombing and the very important future of the memorial and museum, I recalled a very favorite quote, which is, life is experienced by going forward, but it can only be understood by looking back. The title of the book is not attributed to that quote, but to the genius of Kari, but I think the quote is very relevant. Amidst the pandemic, the political and social turmoil, anger with which our country is struggling, I think it's very timely that this book reminds people of how Oklahomans came together as one following the bombing. We didn't look at each other as Democrats or Republicans. The community saw the need, people stepped in, and we were all in the moment together. Something we desperately need now. Our community decided not to be defined by the horrific violence of the tragedy, but rather by the Oklahoma standard that you described. And I think we all need to ask ourselves, how much better would the world be? How much more could we do if we all viewed the world every day the way we viewed it just after the Oklahoma City bombing? So I think the book is extremely timely. It's important to note, and this will probably surprise some people, that approximately half of the people who are residents of Oklahoma City today were not here in 1995. Sam Presti, the general manager of the Thunder, has aptly stated that we need to educate all of our new neighbors about the Oklahoma Standard. And if we don't do so, we risk diluting our greatest natural resource that Tom Brokaw tagged as a sense of goodness, community, and compassion. So I think this book helps in furthering that education.
I agree. I think it's a great blueprint for how a community can come together amidst the very worst of times. Ironically, it was about a year ago today the book arrived on our dock. We'd been anxiously awaiting it. We had just closed the museum due to COVID. We were filming the anniversary special in the museum, and Bob came to do his recording, and we handed him the book really for the first time. And while we had seen proofs, it really was remarkable to kind of see something we had worked on come to a printed format. I think when you read the people's stories in there, and it's told by so many of the different people who were involved, you understand how people came from all walks of life to help, and family members who lost their parents, or where we are today. I mean, it really runs the gamut of the experience of coming together and staying together. And I would just say it shouldn't take a crisis to to bring a community together. And while we did do this in 1995, Bob's right when you say fast forward 25, 26 years, people have forgotten the memorial didn't just get there. I mean, and I say this to new staff people all the time, this didn't just happen. This was a process. Maybe a lot of people. I was looking at pictures this morning of 34 different times we brought the families, survivors, first responders to the site if they wanted to come to look at progress we were making along the way. And those pictures, I mean, some of those people have passed away, some of those people have aged, some of them husbands, kids, it's all different than it was then. But still, the stakeholders remain an important part of our story. But they know what happened there. It's about telling the story to the people who don't know it to make sure it doesn't happen. And so while that's a very special place to those folks, and I hope it always will be, we've got to keep sharing the story to people who don't know it and to people who come behind us and make sure that we're building that bridge to the next generation so that they don't forget the senseless act of violence and that we can all make a difference. And the role we all play when something happens of stepping up to serve and showing up to help and work in those situations.
So we have several questions that have been submitted, and we have one currently on our Q&A. What story of human compassion and resilience most resonated with you that you still vividly remember today?
One of the victim's family members lost her daughter in the bombing, and she was very angry, justifiably so. During the very intense meetings with victims' family members and survivors, those meetings were awash with raw emotions, including a lot of animosity and distrust. During those meetings, one of the meetings, she said, we should never use the word hope in the memorial mission statement because there can be no hope. Later in the process, after several months, she stated that she was so thankful for being involved in the process because the memorial process had given her hope. Philip Thompson, his mother died in the bombing. At the end of the process by which we developed the memorial mission statement, which took about 8 months, he said that through the memorial process, chaos was transformed into hope and unity. So I think we talk about compassion of various people. I think I harken back to the compassion of all of the volunteers who stood the line while there was so much venting of anger and so many raw emotions with which you deal with the grieving and healing process. I look to the compassion that they showed, and that is probably the single most highlight of everything we did.
I would agree with that. I think the remarkable strength of people who were thrust into the spotlight, who didn't ever want to be or expect to be, and they had to deal with national network anchors and talk show hosts, and they had to figure out how to keep cooking dinner at night and handling these stories. And it's an incredible study of just humankind, of how they went through it and survived it, and today live really remarkable lives. But I think when you look at those families and how they figured out they had to go back to work and they had to go back and do their stuff, and they entrusted the storytelling to us. I mean, that's a responsibility I don't take lightly any day of the week. It's their story, but they had to give it to us to be able to tell. I think moving the fence was a really powerful night. We had broken ground, and the fence had protected the site, which where the building stood. Richard Williams, the survivor who had helped building management of the Murrah building, I stood there with him, and we'd walked those grounds so many times, showing designers and showing media, different people. And as that fence moved, that ground became public ground, and it became a place where people would come. And to watch and understand in his mind how something he had protected so closely would become a place for everyone. That's what he wanted, but also it was letting go so that others could learn from it. And I'll never forget standing there with him as that fence moved and that became a public public memorial. I mean, the construction was about to begin, but it was the literal moving of the fence, which had been recommended to us by one of the jurors on the selection committee. It was an architectural genius. I mean, I think the University of Washington, and he said you should publicly move the fence so that people begin to shift in their mind. It was really great advice he'd given us, and I appreciate that. But standing with Richard and watching something he had cared for so well, and giving it away so that others could learn from what he and so many others had gone through, something I personally will never forget.
You know, when we were looking at the 624 designs that were displayed in the building downtown, Charles Gibson, one of the national news anchors, was there. And he said, your greatest single challenge will be to select a design that will replace the fence. So it was meaningful, and it still is.
Well, the fence has played a major role in the show of sympathy and healing. How was it determined to keep a part for the memorial? And can you share what happens to the mementos that are left on the fence?
I'll let you talk about the keeping, and I'll talk about the mementos.
The keeping of the fence did not happen without a lot of discussion. There were some who felt very strongly that we should preserve the fence. There were a few who felt that since the fence was not a part of the selected design in the international design competition, that we should not keep it. The resolution was the right one, to move it to the west side of the memorial where it still exists. And Kari's right. If we had the fence moving ceremony, which was a hand-in-hand prayer service, and then everyone, victims, family members, survivors, first responders, volunteers, physically moved the fence to the west side of the site. And to experience the emotions of that evening made it very clear that the right decision was to preserve it.
Great. It took a lot of cooperation from it. I mean, it wasn't in the original design competition handbook because the fence hadn't really become what it became. And so once we saw that, and we heard the family members who wanted us to think about it, and Bob diplomatically went back to the designers. And I think when you look at how that happened, again, it was going back to the table and sitting down and having a tough conversation and listening. And it's a process I think we've tried hard to do the duration of the memorial. The artifacts from the fence are curated in our archives. There are some items, there's a teddy bear. We try to repurpose those in schools or hospitals, and they're called hope bears. The American flags that are left on the fence are often given to battalions or troops that are going off to war. Ironically, even since we opened the museum, our country's been at war in some format. And so we either work with Tinker or another military base and give those with a note, just this was left as a commemoration. We hope you'll use it as a symbol as you go and fight for our country. And so there are different elements that we pass on and we recycle for the purpose of education. And there are some that are part of the museum exhibit of the fence. And then I think we've got an online a virtual hope trunk that has fence objects in it. And we just try to use those objects to teach and tell the story. It still amazingly gets objects on it. And every time there's a national crisis, you'll see more items. And it has become, as Governor Keating called it, kind of the Wailing Wall of America. But you'll see a fence. Today you'll see a fence in Boulder, Colorado, or Atlanta, where if there's ever an event and there's a fence by it, it has become what really started in Oklahoma City 25 years ago.
So, Bob, in August 1997, speaking of the design of the memorial, you presented that design to President Bill Clinton. How important was it to share the design with him, and how did it feel to be able to share that with President Clinton?
Well, it was a very special day. And one of the things I remember most about that day in visiting with the president and some other members of his cabinet and Vice President Gore, it became very clear that we had been totally free of any political intervention. Politics were set aside during the entire memorial process. And I think President Clinton had a lot to do with that. But it was a very special time to share with him not only the design, but the fact that every major decision in our process had been a result of a unanimous decision built by a strong consensus building process. We democratized a memorial process for, I think, the first time. So there were a lot of firsts with our process. He respected that, and he led the way to keep us free from any political intervention.
When you look at that, that's its own miracle. I mean, Bill Clinton had no reason to give it all to Oklahoma City. He hadn't marked Oklahoma. He hadn't won Oklahoma as a state. I mean, he just depoliticized it all and just did what was right as the the commander in chief. And I think whether what you think about him or as an individual, whatever, he did set a standard, I think, for America as just breaking down the walls and doing the right things. And that's something that we've missed in the White House from time to time. And it's a great example to go back and look at. He had no political gain to do what he did. And I really respect the fact that he took up our cause and kind of championed it for us.
So following the bombing, many businesses and organizations and groups just kind of talking about people coming together, even, putting politics aside. These businesses, organizations, and groups rallied to provide support in a multitude of ways. How do you believe their generosity and willingness to help altered the rescue and recovery efforts?
As I alluded to early on, there was coming together of our community from every segment of our community to do what was needed. Obviously, those in the construction field provided a lot of assistance to the rescue and recovery effort. But the storyline, I think, of the Oklahoma Standard is really of people like me, ordinary people. There was a lady and her neighbors that brought several hundred sandwiches to the site. There was a gentleman that came to the perimeter of the site and offered his steel-toe work boots, maybe the only pair of boots he had, to be used by the rescue workers. There was a little girl who came to the perimeter of the site and gave the policeman a package that contained candy, $1.15, and a thank you note. It wasn't just businesses who spearheaded the effort. It was everyone in our community.
I agree.
So we've talked a lot about the design. There is much symbolism in the components surrounding the memorial grounds. Was that the brainchild of the architect or desired elements presented for inclusion?
Well, the design competition, all the designers received a book. It had guidance in it. The mission statement kind of was the preface for that. And we talked about where the names would be on the footprint. The survivor names would be on the footprint. And the survivor tree would be included somehow. We left the two buildings during the competition up for a while so they could see them during the tours of the design before we took those down. But it was across the street where people had died. But it really was the designer's job to take what the committee thought were the important elements and to highlight those. And that would be that all 160 people would be personally recognized. The survivors would be recognized. The survivor tree would play a prominent role in the design. We worked to keep Fifth Street open, which was something we were working on as the competition commenced. And it was one of the hardest things we did. And I also would say one of the best lessons I personally learned, which was, I talked about this a little bit yesterday, was we were before the council, and it was a powerful presentation by Bob. And a young man stands up and gives an equally powerful presentation. And I think for me, it was the first time I realized that it was okay to have two different opinions. His was as important to him as ours was to us. We just weren't going to probably agree on it, and the council would have to do an important job and make a decision. And they did. And today that man still comes to the anniversary ceremonies. He lived in the Regency Tower, and he's still there. But I think it was a powerful moment for us and for our community to say, we got to figure this out together. And the council showed some real leadership. I mean, it was traffic. It was several different committees, that process.
Yeah, it was a scary time. And that if you go to the memorial today, you can see how important the closing of Fifth Street really was to create the serenity of the site that was desired. But when we started that process, the staff of the Traffic Commission recommended that the street be open, made 2-lane rather than being closed. The Traffic Commission then met, and it was an equal vote for and against closure. Then it went to the Planning Commission, and that was a 5-3 vote in favor of closing. So when we went to City Council, after having meetings with all the members of the City Council, and some of whom had been very non-committal, we were really worried. But on October 22nd of 96, City Council made a unanimous decision to close the street. I remember after the meeting, Bud Welch, whose daughter died in the bombing, said that he had tears of joy over the fact that it was a 9-0 vote, because it's so important that we all be unified. And that shows you how far we had come with this group of family members who had so many raw emotions, so much anger early on. They were now focused on unity.
So I'm wondering, in the process of getting the memorial and the museum completed, what do you feel like was your biggest obstacle or your biggest challenge?
I would say time. I mean, just having enough time, and that we relied on so much volunteer. I mean, these guys, Bob had a full-time law practice. And so sometimes we would meet for an hour in the middle of the day and then several hours at night. We built the museum really in the evening when people had time to come together and focus on the guts and the story of the museum. And so time was just hard. I mean, you look at, we opened it at the 5th anniversary from 1995, and the museum 9 months later. It was remarkable, but it was so critical looking back in history and time. 9/11 happened in September of 2001. We'd opened in February the museum. Everybody's like, "Oh, our museum's over. It's not relevant anymore." It was really more relevant than ever. And so I think having that established and open and being pushed to do it was, I mean, as I look back at it and talk about it in the book, it's really critical that we stayed on that timeline. And it also, I think, helped, as Bob said at the beginning, help people heal. People would choose if they wanted to go to the trials. They were going on simultaneously. Some went to the trials. Some went only to the dedication of the meetings of the memorial, and some chose to do both. And so I think it gave so many people an outlet to say, "I'm going to put my energy here, and it's something positive, something good going to come out of it, and I know I can have impact here, and I'm going to go work on this." And so I think. Having enough time to involve people. And I think I look back on that and think people who helped. I mean, United Way gave us computer. We had nothing. I mean, United Way helped us. Catholic Charities would mail out our monthly postcards to family members. People would donate food for those meetings. St. Anthony would give us part of their room, or the Arts Council would give us their space. I mean, people still, and still today, you look back on people who are still now performing. The ballet has done a special, the Philharmonic, people are still engaged in the story 25 years later. And I think looking back on it, it was Bob and the committees I did it to be so inclusive has paid off, 2 decades later.
So I'm curious, when you were first appointed as chair of the Memorial Task Force, what did you expect or anticipate? Could you have ever dreamed that the result would be what people from all over the world visit today?
Well, we had the dream, but we were also very cautious. In the process of developing the memorial plan, so to speak, that we presented to Ron Nord, we did a lot of research, and we learned that no memorial had ever been created so soon after the tragedy, when raw emotions were so elevated from the healing and grieving process. There is a very fine line to be walked between remembering what you want to remember and not memorializing those things that you do not. And we ran a huge risk that our memorial plan process, like so many others, will be the subject of political intervention and controversy caused by that. So we decided ours would be a very open, public participatory process geared to consensus-based decisions by a very diverse, large task force. I had an acquaintance who told me that the 350-member task force was far too large, inclusiveness was not needed, but we were convinced that to establish a community-wide consensus as to the meaning and objectives and message of the memorial, which we really need in order to get that public ownership of the physical memorial, that we had to have that diversity and we had to move forward with the consensus process. A consensus-based process is very slow. You take a few steps forward and then you back up. But the value of the unanimous decisions that come out of that process cannot be exceeded. So we had dreams of what would happen, but we were also very cautious about how we might be able to get there.
So a question here from our audience. As you think about all the international visitors to the memorial over these many years, what have you observed about their reaction and response? And what does that say about the message we are presenting to the world about who Americans are and who Oklahomans are?
The international visitors are a huge portion of our guests, but I think sometimes they are kind of mystified by the way we're able to tell the story and use technology and first-person accounts to tell it because of our openness and inclusivity. I think that has been a surprise to them. I had an Israeli journalist ask me once, why did you guys do this? If we did this, we'd have a memorial on every corner. And I said, that's exactly why we did it. We don't want to have a memorial on every corner. And so I think, depending on where they're from internationally, they may understand terrorism they may hit way too close to home. And others, I think, are totally interested in how an American could do this to his country. And I think that's the kind of the juggle we try to figure out. But for the most part, I actually have to say I've never watched people go to the museum that did not get changed or understand. I mean, there might be some people say, oh, there might be more to the story or conspiracy, but really not very many. People are, for the most part, have never complained about the story they've learned, and they have left there changed by watching other people tell the story.
At last count, and Kari, correct me if this is inaccurate, but at last count, our average visitation is from almost all 50 states on an annual basis and 81 foreign countries. So the worldwide pilgrimage to the Memorial Museum continues. And I think when they leave with an appreciation that they have the capacity, at least I hope they do, that they have the capacity to step forward and make a difference in the lives of others. And I hope that they thereafter teach by word example the lessons that we're trying to impart. And by doing so, I think they create hope. And I think that hope will continue to multiply with each visitation. So I think we're having a definite impact on the worldwide community. And I think the Memorial Museum, by doing so, is changing lives.
So tell me, for someone who's never visited the Memorial and Museum, what would you want them to know?
I would say really simply the impact of violence. These acts of violence that we watch happen way too often. And I don't want to get a political argument here, but it doesn't have to happen. It shouldn't happen. We should, we had hoped this would be the last one. I mean, it's like we have to figure out how to get into these people's mindset that there's a way to sit down and work through differences without blowing up buildings or, stomping through things. And I mean, we don't have to get in a gun debate or that. It really is not about how you do it. It's that you do it at all. And so we really shouldn't, there should be a way to work things out in Washington, D.C. or in Oklahoma City or in Atlanta or Boulder or name the latest city. There's a whole long list of cities that we've helped and been a part of that those acts have never happened. And it goes way deeper than some things that we can resolve. But I hope that when people walk through there, they realize the senselessness of violence and that not one of those people had to die that day, shouldn't have died that day. McVeigh had an issue, he should have been able to work it out or work through it. And we've got to make sure those avenues are there so that people can work through those issues. And that, I think, remains broader than just our mission. That involves a lot of different people. And I think something we have to work on as a country.
Regrettably, I think we've become a culture of contempt. So I think it's increasingly important that the museum and the educational outreach programs continue to teach the timeless lessons of respecting one another in our conversations, not responding to each other with heated words, that love is much greater than hate, and that all of us have the responsibility to do whatever we can to reduce violence, senseless violence. I think it's my prayer that everyone who comes to the museum will be touched by the stories so that they will ask themselves, what would I do in the circumstances of April 19, 1995? Would I step forward selflessly to make a difference in the lives of others and create hope? What can I do to make the world a better, less violent place? And I think we're having that impact on a lot of people.
And I also think personally, when you walk through the museum, you may not know any of those people, but you can learn from their stories. When you hear a woman who lost her husband say, I had to still figure out how to teach my boys we were still a family, even though their dad was gone. You don't have to have lost someone in a terrorist attack or a violent act. It could maybe cancer or a car wreck. I mean, I hope that it speaks beyond the story too, because of the personal anecdotes and just the personal stories that are told are powerful. I mean, like so transparent and so that they put themselves out there to tell how they've got through it. And when you hear a mom talking about, she had to step in the role and fill the dad's role and the mom's role, that's something a lot of people are going through today. I mean, it's not just 1995, but there's maybe some nugget they can take away that will give them an encouragement or hope because they've seen someone do it.
So we've talked a lot about how this story and the impact of this situation is still relevant today. I'm curious about how you see that leading into the future for the museum and the memorial. What do you see being in store for the next 25 years?
Well, I think, and I've said this for a lot of years, we can never be arrogant enough to think people are just going to always want to learn the story. We've got to figure out how to meet our visitor where they are, if that's through technology or how we tell them the timeless story in a way they're willing to consume it. And that's different for everyone. But for my parents' generation who come through, they want to read the panels and see an artifact. For my generation, it may be videos. For my kids, they want to touch a screen. And so we have to figure out how to meet all those generations. And so we really do. Our goal is kind of 8 to 80 of who we target, because we're targeting tour groups and school groups and consumer travelers who are going across the country and Oklahomans who have moved in who want to understand what their city went through. And I think when we one of the best things that for us that Sam Presti has done is bring every Thunder player through the museum. And I hope that's a partnership that continues, because those are people who go all over the world, all over the country with the words Oklahoma City on their jersey. And they begin to understand the history of their city and understand the power of it. And so I think that's an important partnership. I think teaching people where they are is important, and meeting them where they are is important. And I think making sure we keep those who are involved, who lost the most. They make up a third of our board. They're on every committee. I mean, that's an important part, is keeping them engaged in the story. And that's going to change and ebb and flow as generations cycle. But I think it's an important part of keeping our story true and focused on the mission. We have what we call a conscience committee, which is made up of about 30 family members, survivors, and first responders. And I meet with them often, or I'll pitch them an idea. We had someone send us an idea, and I can send it out and say, what do you guys think about this? And they come with it from a great perspective. And sometimes I worry about, sometimes like, it's great, it's fine. But it's good to have them sign off on it and let us know that we're all on the same page. So those are all important things, I think, as we look to the next 10, 20 years, that we want to make sure that the story remains relevant and we tell it in a way that remains relevant. And that with the design, the maintenance of the design it's an incredible design. It is not easy to maintain. And staying up with technology as lights change from, LED to whatever's next. I mean, those are the things you don't really think about when you're building because you're just trying to get it built. But maintaining it has been a challenge, and I'd say that in the best way possible. We want to make sure it's maintained to the standard in which it was built, and we don't want it to fall prey to short budgets or anything that you see at other national sites. And so that's why we kept the ownership local, that we could maintain the look and feel of it as it was designed. And I would say that's our number one priority.
Okay. Well, Bob, I think I'd like to kind of bring us back to the book and ask, how hard was it to determine the storyline for the book with all these many things to share?
Well, I had the advantage of working with Kari, and she always makes it easier for me to do things than might otherwise be the case. Kari and I had a great collaboration for almost 6 years, almost daily conversations, and so we know each other very well. We know the good parts and the bad parts, but it was a great collaboration. It was a difficult project. It was difficult to remember some of the things that were very challenging during the memorial process, but we got there. Feel really, really good about the end result. I feel great about the healing that was promoted. So to answer your question in a nutshell, it was great to work with her on the project, and very pleased about how it turned out.
I would just add, it really became a staff project. I mean, the curators were involved, the archivists were involved, our digital team was involved, our photographers were involved. I mean, I don't think there's anyone on our staff that didn't have a chance to have a little bit of input on the book. And it really was a great lesson for them. Many of them had come since. And so for them to kind of get ingrained in the process and work through it, and there'd be certain picture Bob and I knew we had, and to make someone go back and look for it or go dig for it was, kind of a scavenger hunt in some way. It's like it was so intense that we knew what we wanted and we knew what had worked. And I was flipping through it this morning while I was on another call, and I look back at that and think about how many people have touched this process, but they all were willing to do it because they saw a great leader doing it and giving them his time. And I just think you can't underscore the work that the volunteers did. I was paid to do my part, but these guys, I mean, they threw their lives into it. And when you go through the book and understand what stands there today, is truly a result of the community coming together. It's nothing but that. And it wasn't the National Park Service building it. It wasn't the city building it. It was a community coming together and saying, we're going to make a statement. It would have been much easier to drive to the Thunder games or go to work downtown and not have to drive past 3.5 acre memorial. I mean, it would have been in so many ways the easier way out. I mean, this community chose the harder route. And when you drive past it, you're forced to have a conversation with your kid in the car or have a conversation with a coworker who's in from out of town. And I think Oklahoma City chose the harder route, and the volunteers in the community stepped up and did a remarkable job.
Well, I have just 2 questions left. The first one is, how was survivor defined in this process?
You might think that's an easy project, but it was not. It took about 18 months. And again, we used a grassroots consensus building approach. It was very frustrating for the committee, and sometimes the committee wanted to give up. And I remember remarking to Richard Williams, who co-chaired the effort, that to do so would trivialize the horrendous injuries that those who walked out of or were pulled out of the Murrah building and surrounding buildings sustained. Ultimately, the definition of survivor for purposes of whose names would go on the granite that's salvaged from the Murrah building at the east side of the field of chairs. That definition was based on those most at risk. So everyone who was located in the Murrah block, the block in which the Murrah building was located, in the Journal Record block north of there, the half blocks on each side of those 2 blocks and the streets within, All of those were considered survivors for purposes of the 600 names that went on the granite on the memorial site. We also included anyone who had been admitted to the hospital because of the bombing and not released same day within that group. Then we expanded the definition for purposes of whose stories would be told within the museum to include everyone who had a workplace within that defined area and just happened not to be there that day. But it took 18 months and a lot of very hard work by the committee to get to that definition.
It seems like what we've learned a lot today is how thoughtful and mindful this process was and how that has helped contribute to the institution, to the memorial and museum remaining relevant today.
I agree.
So I'm going to close with a question that all Oklahomans ask each other. Where were each of you at 9:02 a.m. on the morning of April 19th, 1995?
I was walking on my door to go to a class. I was working on my MBA, and I was literally walking on my condo with about 50th and Penn. I watched the garden doors go out and come back in, and I flipped on the television and saw what you see in the museum today, the helicopter, Channel 9 helicopter shot, just a few minutes in the Regis and Kathy Lee, and watching the helicopter reporter and Tammy Payne go back and forth trying to figure it out. And that is, I think, how many people, if you were sitting at home or if you turned on the television, that's what you saw.
I was in my office about 5 blocks south of the Memorial Building, and I happened to be on the phone over by a window in the corner, and I was looking across the street at a crew working on the roof of the hotel across the street from our office. Heard the blast, saw the people on top of the roof sort of duck and respond. I thought it was a natural gas explosion. And like Kari, I went to a television and saw the same footage and I absolutely could not believe it.
We really appreciate you both being here today to share your story with us, a story that belongs to so many people in our community. Before we go, is there anything final that you'd like to add or share to our discussion today?
I think the only thing I would like to share is, again, to reiterate I think we achieved in large part the healing priority that we set out early on in the process. A few years ago, one of the survivors who was trapped in the bombing in the building initially, he was rescued and then he went back in to help others, saw a lot of horrific images, and he suffered from post-traumatic stress and had significant depression. A few years ago, he called to have lunch, and during the lunch, he said, "This is long overdue, but I just want to let you know that if your group had not involved me in the memorial process as you did, I'm convinced I would not be alive today." So it reaffirmed that, at least in part, we achieved that goal of healing.
I would say if you've not taken the time to come to the museum, or you haven't felt you've had the strength to do it, to just trust us and come and let me walk you through personally, or one of our staff. If you want to bring family, I mean, it's worth a visit. It is. You will be so proud of the story you see. It's a hard story. There's nothing easy about this story. People died needlessly, and people's lives were changed forever. But how people came together and how Oklahomans came together and the story that's told is something that will make you very proud, especially in today's world when you see so much change and so much infighting and people bickering about life. It really is the simple things that it doesn't take much to step up to be kind. And I think you will be very proud of the story and the people of the state. And I would just invite you to come and see the story. It's a great time to say, it's been long enough, I can go do this. And I talk to people every day. They're like, I just haven't had the nerve to do it. And I just really challenge you to find the internal fortitude to see it. And no matter what you went through, there are a lot of people who've seen it who lost the most that day. And I I would tell you that I promise you can get through it. Even if we just take a section at a time, you'll be very proud of the story you see.
I think if anyone does not understand what it is to endure the needless death and injury of innocent people, and yet press forward with faith, hope, and love, they need to come to the museum.
Well, let's make sure that all of our viewers can understand where they're supposed to go and when. And I think that would be best by sharing the website. Would you mind, Kari?
Memorialmuseum.com is our website too.
Memorialmuseum.com.
Right.
So please, visitors, check that out to find out what hours of operation are, and make sure also to follow the Memorial and Museum on social media. Thank you all so much for being here today and helping share with our panelists, asking questions and being part. I did want to share this last comment. It says, as someone who wasn't in Oklahoma during the bombing, this has been so very interesting. Thank you for a great chat with these authors. I think that says it really well. Now, you guys can definitely pick up a copy of the book in the Gaylord Pickens Museum gift store, or you can visit us online at oklahomahof.com. And thank you again so much for being here. And thank you so much to our panelists. We hope to see you next time for Beyond the Book.